Okay, let's get this out of the way before we get started so that you guys understand where I'm coming from in no uncertain terms. Anti-vaxxers are ignorant idiots engaging in a conspiracy theory. So good. That's got that out of the way. And what's this got to do with video games? It's got to do with video games because it turns out that the game Plague Inc., which came out in 2012 and was published and developed by Endemic, is getting a buffer in-game to add anti-vaxxers into the game. And this all came about as a result of an online petition. I didn't know anything about this. I actually watched a video by my friends over at GameCast over the weekend, and they were talking about it. And I subsequently went and had a look, and it's a really interesting story. And as I say, the game is going to get a buffer, and the developers are currently looking into how they can implement that because, as they say, if they implement it and they're not careful, having anti-vaxxers in the game could mean that the plague in the game actually develops too quickly and you will win the game too easily, because in effect you are playing the plague. You are playing the virus that is going to cause people to die. So your job in the game is to kill everyone off. And what they're saying is that if you kill everyone off too quickly and you win the game, then that's going to ruin the balance of the game. So they're looking into adding anti-vaxxers in, but not making them too pernicious. And those are my words, not theirs. The fact is that anti-vaxxers are a danger. And the fact that this game is showing that, or will be showing that once they can incorporate it into the game, is no bad thing. There's always, way back in the depths of time when vaccines first started to come about, if you read into the history of it, there's always been people who were worried about vaccinations. And in the early days, they probably were right to be a little bit worried because there were problems with vaccinations. Most of those problems have been dealt with. But the modern controversy comes about as a result of some research, and I use the term research in its loosest possible sense, that was carried out by Andrew Wakefield. Now, I don't know if you guys know who Andrew Wakefield was, but Andrew Wakefield was a doctor working in the UK who did some research into the link between MMR and autism, and supposedly found that there was a link. He was subsequently struck off by the British Medical Association for serious breaches in his research, and the paper that he wrote, or co-wrote, was withdrawn from the Lancet, and other people who worked on the paper distanced themselves from it. He was shown to have conducted research that just did not stand up, and that's the nicest way of putting it. You should read around about it and find out about what happened. Andrew Wakefield is not held in high esteem within the medical community any longer. The only people who hold him in high esteem are those engaging in the conspiracy theory that are telling us that vaccines are being pushed on us by the medical profession and the medical industry in order to make money, and that they don't care about things like autism. The supposed link with autism, people still bang on about it. It was supposedly due to mercury in vaccinations. Well, mercury, or trimersal as it's called, doesn't exist in most vaccinations now, certainly not in the UK. As far as I understand it, reading the NHS website, trimersal doesn't exist in vaccinations at all in the UK anymore. It may exist in flu vaccinations, I'm not absolutely sure about that. But certainly MMR doesn't have it, so that supposed link with autism doesn't exist anymore. And there was some research done, they looked at Russia. I think there was a period in Russia where vaccinations were in short supply, and the instances of autism didn't change in relation to the vaccinations. Surprise, surprise. So yeah, I mean, if you want to know a bit more about this, there's a really good book out there. It's called Deadly Choices, and it's by a doctor, an MD, called Paul Offit. He's a US guy. And I've read the book. It's a really interesting book, and it goes through the history of vaccinations, and it talks about how anti-vaccination groups have come about throughout history. and about what happened with Andrew Wakefield and all those kind of things. So if you're interested, go and have a read, and I'll put a link in the description to the book. Definitely go and have a read. Don't read books like Somebody's Marvellous Measles. I'm not going to give the full title. I don't want people going and looking for that one, which is full of misinformation and nonsense, and led to certain wags coming up with other alternatives for books like Gordon's Grand Gonorrhea and Stephen's Stimulating Syphilis and things like this, which is quite amusing. But when you think about it, this is a serious issue. People die if they don't get vaccinations, and we've seen an increase in childhood illnesses. These illnesses like measles, like mumps, like rubella, these things are coming back as a result of people who are not vaccinating their children. My cousin currently has leukemia, and he has to take drugs that will suppress his immune system. And if he comes into contact with any of these illnesses, they will kill him. And there have been cases of people who have died. And if you don't vaccinate your kids, it's not just your kids that you're affecting, because what you in effect do is you reduce the herd immunity. And when you reduce the herd immunity, those people who are at risk, those people who can't take the vaccinations, will be subject to those illnesses. And if they catch them, they could and often will die. And even if they don't die, the side effects of those illnesses are horrendous. When I was a student, I worked in the stockroom at a health service laboratory, and there were pictures on the walls on some of the corridors of some of these illnesses and what they would do, and it wasn't pleasant. If you want to know what these illnesses can do, go and look it up. Go and look up what measles can do. Go and look up what mumps can do, rubella, all these childhood illnesses. Go and look up and see what they can do to people and what they have done to people in the past. And then ask yourself, is it worth not giving vaccinations, given that there is no provable link between vaccinations and autism or other illnesses? That's the truth of it. That's what the evidence shows, and you should follow the evidence. Don't listen to the person, listen to the evidence. So the fact, anyway, let's get back to the game. The fact that endemic are bringing in this buffer into the game is, I think it's quite funny. I think it's a light-hearted way of promoting science and scientific ideas. And as Count over at GameCast put it, I'm going to go and be buying the game by the end of the day. And so he presumably owns that game already. And I think I'm going to go and buy the game as well, because it's worth supporting a game that promotes science. So yeah, this one's been a bit of a heavy one. I thank the GameCast guys for bringing this to my attention. Go and have a look at their video as well, and I'll put a link into that, because that's worth watching. And they cover it in a much more light-hearted way. They said they didn't want to get too deep, and you know, you can go down the rabbit hole with these things. But this is a subject that is close to my heart. My kid's 9 now. I had to go through the process of having him vaccinated. And it is a hard choice to make. You know, you do have to think about it, because, you know, you're sticking a needle in your kid's arm. And so it's not a nice thing to do when you sit in there and other kids are having it done and they're crying and all the rest of it, because it's not a pleasant thing to have to do. And if you're thinking that it might hurt your child to do it, then I can understand why people might be wary. But the reality is that that brief moment of sticking the needle in the arm and causing your child to cry is a lot less of an issue than actually having to sit through and watch your child suffer from one of these illnesses. And remember, it's not just your child. You could be affecting someone else's child as well. And as my sister's mother-in-law put it when she was talking about having her children vaccinated many years ago, she said this: if you had ever seen what these illnesses do, you would not hesitate. And that's the reality of it. And I know I've got a bit heavy on this one, but this is one that, as I say, is close to my heart. And I get really, really angry with these people who engage in these dangerous conspiracy theories relating to childhood vaccinations. If you think about it, nearly all the children out there have childhood vaccinations. The number of people who have problems are minuscule, and most of those problems are correlation, not causation. There's a story in Paul Offit's book of a doctor who took his child to the surgery to get immunised, to have his vaccinations. So he went in to do his vaccinations, and that night, that child got very, very sick. Now, you might think it was the vaccinations that caused that, until you realise the rest of the story. That doctor got called away. He couldn't stay there with his child to have him vaccinated that day. So they took the child away, and the child wasn't actually vaccinated. The child got sick that evening. It would have been a complete coincidence. It would have been a correlation, not a causation. And I always remember when I did psychology, my psychology tutor used to talk about when drowning increases, when more people drown, more people are eating ice cream. So you could think that from that, ice cream causes drowning. If you eat more ice cream, then you're more likely to drown. Well, no. What actually it is that when it gets hotter, more people swim. When more people swim, they're more likely to drown. But when it gets hotter, more people eat ice cream too. So there is a correlation between people eating more ice cream and people being more likely to drown, but it's not caused by people eating the ice cream. And that's the same with vaccinations. All the information we have, all the data that is out there, the millions of people that are vaccinated, there is a minuscule number of people that have some sort of seeming reaction. But as I said, with that child wasn't actually vaccinated. But if he had have been, maybe, even though the guy was a doctor, maybe he would have come to the conclusion that it had been caused by the vaccination, when in fact, it was just a coincidence. There was a correlation there. He would have been to have his vaccination. He developed a problem, but they weren't linked in any way. It was just time. And there's this element of time involved as well, because some of these illnesses, like autism, start to manifest around about the same time that you would be having your vaccinations. So you first notice autism around that time. But when you get instances where vaccinations aren't given, the number of cases of autism remains roughly the same. You know, if you account for things like better testing and that kind of thing. So yeah, look, this one's got a bit heavy. Sorry about that. But this is something that really twists my melon. Anti-vaxxers are, excuse the pun, but they're a plague. And I wish they would just go away, because they are literally causing people to die. And when a game does something light-hearted like this, and Rebel Inc. or Plague Inc., the game, and Endemic say, if this petition gets 10,000 signatures, we will add a new anti-vax scenario. I think it's funny. And, when people believe ridiculous things, when people believe nonsense, one of the best ways of dealing with them is to take the mick. And this is kind of taking the mickey. It's also backing science, and that's fantastic. So yeah, I'm going to go and buy this game. And I think you should too, because this is great, and it's hilarious. And I've not played the game yet, but hopefully it's fun. But anyway, as I say, that's me done. Sorry I got a bit heavy on this one, but I think it's an important one to talk about. Thanks to the GameCast guys for flagging this up. And thanks for Eurogamer, who wrote the article that I was using for this video. And yeah, I'm done. I'm going to go and grab myself a cup of tea and stop thinking about anti-vaxxers. Bye.